episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
So welcome everybody again to another episode of our show with another really fascinating guest for you today, focused on creating a better tomorrow for many people around the globe. Today we have the honor of being joined by Ms. Stephanie Smith, who is Director of Humanitarian and Development at Mastercard Company, the American multinational financial services corporation. Ms. Smith is responsible for operations of the Humanitarian Development Group and ensuring their team's efficient, consistent, and effective delivery, ultimately against their vision to provide digital tools and access for education, health, commerce, and a variety of other critical services for marginalized individuals and communities around the globe. The Humanitarian Development Group is focused on driving commercially sustainable social impact in collaboration with government, non-governmental organizations, and other private sector companies. After graduating from Oxford, Ms. Smith began her professional career at a rapidly growing technology company known as Applied Predictive Technologies, ultimately acquired by Mastercard, where she was responsible for delivering analytics software and consulting engagements to Fortune 500 companies. She's particularly passionate about diversity and inclusion, as well as the ability of the private sector to solve social problems, and has a broad experience in delivering projects and technologies to drive lasting social impact. She led a pro bono project in partnership with the city government of New Orleans and a nonprofit that ultimately pioneered how APT applied data sets and technology to facilitate and measure inclusive growth. This is also proactively taking on new projects in social impact-oriented industries, for example, applying test and learn analytics to education, and she led APT's Global Women's Leadership Network, which is a business resource group to connect female leaders and build more inclusive workplaces. She's very passionate about mentoring of junior staff. Outside of all of that, Ms. Smith has volunteered her time as a mentor with both the Girls Network in London and fundraising with Girls on the Run in Washington, D.C. A lot of exciting things to talk about today. Ms. Stephanie Smith, thanks so much for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us for a little while.
All right, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a really exciting set of topics that we don't normally get a chance to go into. I'd love to start things off as we typically do by handing you the floor for a few minutes, really just to talk a little bit more about yourself. If you could take us back, everything from where you grew up, how you developed your interest in some of the areas of study, philosophy, politics, economics, and a bit of your early career journey. I think that'd be a great way to lay the ground for everything we're going to be talking about.
Great. Yeah, I'm happy to. So I was raised in a bilingual German-British household, and we moved around a fair amount when I was a kid. So, we kind of bounced around between Belgium and England, and then the most, really the most formative years of my childhood, kind of middle school, early high school, that was actually in the States, in the quite rural part of Pennsylvania, and then went back to Germany for my last 2 years of school. And I mean, it's cliched, but certainly moving around a lot when you're that young really teaches you flexibility, teaches you resilience. For me personally, I really came to appreciate, these pretty vast differences between what are otherwise four, kind of on paper, very developed, rich countries. And that's, I think, kind of where that interest in PPE, so philosophy, politics, and economics, which is the degree that I read at Oxford, that's where that really started, because I really wanted to kind of dig in and start to understand what are the fundamental different kind of social and political principles that actually are responsible for those differences? What are the different institutions that actually govern based on those principles? So that's what led me to PPE. That and really kind of my love of maths and logic, which underlines the whole degree. So I did PPE for 3 years at Oxford, and then from there, as you mentioned, I started my career at APT. And I chose consulting, because I think it's such a great thing to do for your first kind of stepping stone out of college, right? It really teaches you a core foundation of different skills. You get this exposure to a really wide breadth of industries and problems. And I'm actually really glad in particular I chose to do this at a technology company at APT. It's the first time that I really, saw the huge impact that technology can have. And this was just for, for financial services, for retail problems. And so I started to think, okay, well, how can we apply this technology for social impact, right? For different social problems. And there's such kind of a wide gamut under that big umbrella. So, fast forward a couple of years, as you mentioned, APT is acquired by Mastercard, and we go through the full integration. And I mean, I'll confess, I never thought I'd be working in financial services. That's not really kind of where I thought my career would go. But I was so surprised and so kind of impressed, and I really am still every day, by Mastercard's commitment to their mission and their ethos of doing well by doing good. I mean, under this broad umbrella of social impact, there's so much that Mastercard does. You mentioned, I'd worked on a couple of projects that were the first kind of times I really dipped my toes into this world. I did that datathon work, pro bono datathon with the New Orleans, all around inclusive growth, work with government engagement about COVID response more recently. And then ultimately, this is kind of what led me to taking on a full-time position within the Humanitarian and Development team at Mastercard. So it's kind of how I got from A to B and where I am now. But yeah, that's kind of a little bit about my background.
Excellent. And as I mentioned in the opening, you're very passionate about diversity inclusion, equally passionate about the private sector's role in solving these social problems. And it's just it's a very unique world we live in now, because we have companies. Obviously, Mastercard's a huge company, but there's companies out there now with unheard of $1 trillion market caps. We have a variety of very rich people that have been going into space the last couple of weeks. And you always get involved in these little discussions in the social media now. You watch them, at least I do, about, on one hand, hey, they need to innovate. But on the other hand, if we just dedicated a small percent of that money to a variety of these problems over here, we probably won't have too many more problems to deal with. And, I'd love to sort of get your sort of top line perspective before we go into Mastercard and everything you're doing there. What is the private sector's role when we have $1 trillion market caps and when we have, an incredible amount of wealth sloshing around this globe? What is the proper role for private sector in dealing with these issues that we should be able to solve?
This is a fantastic question, and one that we spend a lot of time debating internally and in different kind of external forums as well. So I'll kind of start here, kind of from a diversity inclusion perspective. My interest in inclusion really began with the role of women in the workplace, and that's how I've gone to doing some of this work around Women's Leadership Network. It's about that business resource group you had mentioned. And from there, really organically grew to start thinking about, well, what does inclusion mean when you get kind of outside of my own four walls, outside of my office space, my company? And this is really Mastercard's wheelhouse, right? We're so focused on digital inclusion, on financial inclusion. And so when we talk about what is the role of Mastercard or any private sector organization, I think there's probably kind of two dimensions that I like to think about this on. The one is, what are our core competencies versus a non-governmental organization, like an NGO? What can the private sector bring that we can do in a differentiated way? What's our comparative advantage, I think, from an economics perspective, right? And that is really, it is innovation and it is technology, especially for a technology company like Mastercard. So, instead of an NGO reinventing the wheel and creating technologies that already exist or that another company, private sector company, can create more efficiently and deploy more efficiently, let's go to the private sector. Let's have them build those technologies. Let's have them redirect their resources to solving some of these social problems, these really pressing challenges. So I'll give you an example. So, one thing that we've been hearing a lot recently is in the development sector, there's development actors that have this kind of this surge of interest, this trend towards digital, thinking, okay, digital, that's the solution, right? That's how we can, scale our solutions. That's how we can reach millions and billions of people at scale more efficiently. And there's certainly a lot of merit to that argument, but a lot of development actors just fundamentally don't have the knowledge or the expertise to do digital safely, right? To focus on digital kind of data privacy and data security, which are such huge important topics for anybody, let alone for the vulnerable populations that we're trying to reach, especially those populations that tend to be digitally illiterate. So this is, I think, where, the private sector can play a really key role. Mastercard in particular, our whole business is built around trust. We create, our core business is creating the rules and the standards for payments to work. So for your bank and the Starbucks bank where you buy your coffee, they need to be able to trust each other that when you go and pay $5 for a coffee, that your bank will send that money to Starbucks' bank, right? That trust needs to exist. And that exists because we build these rules and these standards. And the same is true in a development context, right? So the team that I work on is building those rules to create that trust, and also creating trust with the end user, right? The user has to be able to trust the digital solution. So one kind of principle, just to kind of take this a little further, a little more detailed, is this principle of data minimization that we operate on. So the idea is, if you as a health service provider, if you don't need a piece of data to deliver your service, you shouldn't have access to it. So something like a biometric. Biometrics are super important as a way to establish a person's identity, to say that you are eligible for this specific health benefit or this humanitarian aid from an NGO or from your government. But a lot of those entities don't need to have a picture of your palm or your face. That's very, very private, personally identifiable information. So we create technology that will actually tokenize the biometric template. So you can throw away the template. You're left with a secured, hashed, kind of encrypted ID, and no one else has access to it. It's meaningless. It doesn't tell you anything about who you are. And we make sure that you only have access to that tokenization of the biometric if you actually need it to deliver your service. No one else should have it. So that's really important, like kind of everything around data. But just more broadly, kind of thinking about, that's our core competency at Mastercard, but as a private sector organization, what is your skill? What technology can you bring to the development sector? So that's one. The other track real quick that I would think about when we think about the role of the private sector is sustainability or commerciality.
Yep.
So there is, especially in more recent years, the resource gap, so the gap between the needs of the development sector and the humanitarian sector and the funds that are available, that's shrinking, especially in the case of COVID, right? I mean, the UK government recently slashed their aid budget and it has huge consequences. So what do you do if you don't have $1 billion? How do you reach billions of people with critical services? That's where not Mastercard, but definitely Mastercard and other private sector organizations can come in, right? Private sector organizations have to be commercially sustainable by definition. They have to at least break even to deliver their service.
Sure.
This is really critical, especially when you're thinking about bridging the gap from the nexus between humanitarian and development. So humanitarian being kind of short-term critical needs that need to be filled versus development as a much longer or at least medium-term play of how do we create growth, how do we create jobs. When we think about development, bringing the private sector in, bringing local private organizations in is really critical so we can actually create solutions that are commercially sustainable and can exist over the long term to meet those development needs.
Excellent. And yeah, so as somebody, I'm one of those people that I have my MasterCard in my pocket here. I primarily do use it for that trust at Starbucks down the street. But, I was diving, further into the humanitarian development group at Mastercard. And, some very interesting things stand out. First, this number of this, we don't think about it, these 2 billion adults around the planet that just are not in the formal financial system still, which is equally, shocking. And then, as you were mentioning about the aid agencies, especially nowadays, but once again, you mentioned a little bit about the digital solutions, how your tools there can help improve those processes. Walk us a little through sort of humanitarian development within Mastercard, sort of where it sits. And I know there's also the Mastercard Foundation. I'm not sure how it's connected there, but then I guess the third part of that, I asked this sort of jokingly, but how do you decide on a given day sort of what to work on? Like, where do the priorities come from? Who sets down, we're going to focus on this issue versus that and so forth? Take us a little on that journey, if you would.
Sure. I'm just scribbling down the questions as well so I can remember to answer them all.
I can repeat them too.
Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about Mastercard and Humanitarian Development, or H&D team. So I'll start with this. common misconception, Mastercard is not a credit card company. A lot of people think that we do that. We don't actually do the lending. We're not the ones providing the credit or technology. Right? So we're building the technology to build that trust to make those payments work. And Mastercard, our mission is to make the digital economy accessible to everyone and everywhere. And the H&D team that I work on, we're really integral to this mission. What we're doing is bringing the digital economy and all of its benefits to communities that are previously underserved, those that aren't digitally connected today. So just kind of where we sit as you ask that question. So the H&D team is actually within Mastercard, the corporate, not the foundation. And there is the Chinese wall between the two of us. So the foundation was set up when we IPO'd. We gave them, I think, about 10% of our shares. It was worth around $500 billion at the time. It has massively grown now. They just made a huge, I think, $1.3 billion donation to COVAX as part of the COVID response. But they're very separate that Chinese wall because they're our biggest shareholder. And then within the corporate, so within Mastercard worldwide, as we say, there are countless teams that are working on these goals around digital and financial inclusion. Everything from philanthropy with our Center for Inclusive Growth through to our more commercial engagements directly with banks, with governments, and so on and so forth. My team actually sits squarely in the middle. So we are what I would call a social impact enterprise. Our number one objective is social impact, right? It is improving the well-being of the end user. But, and this comes back to the point I made earlier, we need to do so in a way that is commercially sustainable, not just for us, but for all the partners that we work with to actually reach the end user and deliver a service. That's the way that we can reach scale. That's the way that we can touch billions of people and their lives. So that's the H&D team. Concretely, in terms of what we actually do, so we are building a digital infrastructure. It's called Community Pass. Digital infrastructure to reach the base of the pyramid. So people who are living on less than $2, less than $5 a day. It's really important, right? And I can dive into some of the challenges of kind of why we're building it, but first and foremost, it's really important to think about, the digital infrastructure that we're using, when you're ordering food and having it show up at your front door during the pandemic, when you're accessing, education services for your family or looking into a health clinic to get your COVID vaccine, that infrastructure is seamless, but it doesn't work for anyone else. Like fundamentally for the base of the pyramid, that infrastructure doesn't exist and doesn't work. And that digital divide, as you'll be familiar with, was so clearly exacerbated by the pandemic. Those of us who are digitally included, we can work remotely, continue to earn income, we can continue to access all of those education services, health services I talked about. If you were digitally excluded, you were left behind and the services didn't exist for you. So it's a really important problem to solve, but it's a really difficult problem to solve. It's kind of three reasons why the infrastructure that we're using doesn't work for the base of the economic pyramid. So the first one is connectivity. About 60% of people in the African continent and India as well, they're offline. And honestly, even if they're statistically speaking online, the connectivity is intermittent at best and it's unaffordable. So we need to create solutions to reach them that, while digital in nature, actually function offline. So connectivity is the first real challenge. And there's fantastic work being done by telcos globally to build up that connectivity infrastructure, but it takes time and it's a huge investment. So what do we do in the meantime? So connectivity. Identity is the second big challenge. So I believe it's about 40% of people in low income countries don't have a foundational identity or a digital record identity. And foundational identity means like a passport or a birth certificate, something issued by a government. Without an identity, how do you access health services? How do you know that you're entitled to an aid benefit? So what we're doing at Mastercard is we're creating a digital identity and we're making it unique with biometrics. And in doing so, we're creating what is a functional identity for the billions of people who don't have one. And so functionally, we're not in the business of foundational identities. We don't create government identities, but we can create one that's useful. We can create a functional identity. So that's the second challenge. And the third one is all around cost. If you think about it today, there isn't one interoperable infrastructure for service providers, be they health service provider, fintech, an agricultural company, for them to reach their user at the base of the pyramid. And that has a number of implications, right? Like that's costly. It's this idea, again, of kind of they're reinventing the wheel to actually reach the user. So an example, kind of a pretty classic anecdote in the humanitarian context, there's this case of the kind of Syrian refugee in Lebanon, Jordan. They were given 17 different cards for 17 different programs. And not even, from 17 different NGOs, even with the same NGO, that NGO is giving them different cards for different services. I mean, it's mind-boggling, right? From the perspective of the service provider, they're replicating costs, they're replicating technology to reach the user when they could be investing those costs and actually improving kind of their core business, the core service they're providing. But think about it from the perspective of the refugee. You're going through a humanitarian crisis. You do not have the time or the tools to think about how you navigate the rules of 17 different programs just to get access to food and basic necessities. So, I mean, it's a massive problem. What we're doing with Community Pass is actually centralizing that complexity. So we're creating one digital infrastructure that is interoperable, the same way that our core payments business is interoperable across different banks and different merchants. We're creating that interoperability across different service providers. So you can crowd them in to one platform, and that brings down the cost to serve for all of them. And it makes the experience more uniform. So now the refugee, she can, with the same card, she can go and securely verify her identity in the same way that points the interface across different places. She can check into a health clinic and get access to vaccines for herself and her kids. She can receive aid from the government. She can go and pay for her kids' school fees, or if she's a farmer, she can directly connect to a buyer and sell her produce, cutting out the middleman, getting a fair price, increasing her income. And so the way we do that is we're actually building a card, not unlike the credit card that you and I have in our wallets. And on that is a multi-wallet application, which means you can basically stack those different ag, health, education, et cetera, services in one place. And that's really it. That's the crux of Community Pass. Our fundamental thesis is that it's just too expensive today to reach these vulnerable populations, and critically to do so at scale. I mean, there's loads of great organizations that are doing fantastic work, but have we really seen scale? Have we really seen organizations be able to do this in a huge way with billions of people globally? That's the problem that we're trying to solve.
Fascinating, really fascinating. And Steffi, along with all of those responsibilities, there's this case. You are additionally, as part of Mastercard, responsible for the Partnership for Central America initiative. You're involved in this. There was a call to action by Vice President Kamala Harris back in May, being run now, coordinated with the State Department, but basically looking at this significant issue that we have with migration in Central America, and once again, how business, social enterprises can bring solutions. And they mention as part of the partnership, there's basically these 4 important actions that need to happen: coordination, facilitation, convening, and tracking. Seems like it's right up your alley. Obviously, Mastercard is there, but a lot of other organizations, coffee companies, Chobani Yogurt, a variety of other groups. Talk a little bit about the Partnership for Central America, how you got involved in your responsibilities there, because this is really so timely and fits very nicely into everything you've been talking about so far.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. I absolutely love this project. This has probably been one of the favorite things I've worked on in my time at Mastercard. So yeah, you said the context really nicely. As you said, Vice President Kamala Harris is leading for the administration an effort to really address the root causes of forced migration in Central America. And specifically, we're talking about the Northern Triangle. So it's Guatemala, it's El Salvador, and it's Honduras. And to an extent, we talked about Southern Mexico as well. And what she's done is brought together this fascinating and really diverse group of organizations from civil society, from the private sector. It's thinking about, in the short term, how do we provide assistance and tools that are critically needed to people in need in those countries? And then as we transition to the medium and long term, how do we actually, drive inclusive economic growth, growth that benefits everybody in a society? How do we create jobs? How do we, give people hope again? So that's the kind of the overarching mission statement of what she's, what her initiative is. One of the first companies that were kind of brought into this partnership as a founding member was, as you said, Mastercard. Given our history in digital and financial inclusion, and we have, we've been doing this for well over a decade, and we have a lot of really valuable learnings about how do you actually lift an individual out of poverty? How do you give them hope and give them a job? So, just a couple of kind of anecdotes to kind of underscore what we do from the inclusion perspective. So, we know, and there's really strong evidence to suggest that digitizing economic activity and thus creating transparency has a myriad of benefits. I mean, everything from strengthening the capacity of the state, reducing corruption, because you can now see where the money is flowing, reducing fraud and leakage, and the one that I found really interesting, reducing crime. So crime is a major impetus for migration. Crime and violence are some of the biggest issue areas that we need to address in the Northern Triangle to really have an impact. And by creating that transparency, you can do exactly that. So there's this fascinating case study. It's actually from the US. This is, I think it's 2014, so a couple of years ago now. The US converted welfare benefits that were previously paper checks. They converted them to digital, and in doing so, they brought the crime rate down by 10%. I mean, 10%, right? It's huge. So it's important. Digital financial inclusion is important. That's why we believe the Vice President, through the Partnership with Central America, kind of created this connection. Mastercard was brought in as one of the founding members. And what we've committed to doing now is to bring 5 million individuals in the Northern Triangle into the formal economy, and also to digitize 1 million micro and small merchants. And we're kind of in the stage now of thinking through, well, what exactly do those programs look like? I mean, we can do everything from working with governments to create digital identities and digitizing government flows. We can, what my team works on is working with farmers, for example. We can create a digital marketplace to connect farmers in the dry corridor who work in ag, connect them directly with a buyer so that they can have that connection and kind of cut out the middleman, can directly see the prices, can continue selling their produce even when local markets are shut down during COVID. That's actually been something that we saw in India. This is so interesting. This is a bit of a tangent, but when the pandemic hit in India, the first wave even, we saw that local markets were shut down, and that meant that as a smallholder farmer, you can't sell your produce. So your produce is perishing in your farm, and you now don't have an income. So what we did is we worked with the government of Andhra Pradesh in India to actually accelerate the rollout of our community pass solution there. And in doing so, we connect the buyer directly to the farmer, and the farmer can now actually sell the produce, and they were able to command 25 to 50% higher prices for things like turmeric and the mango that they're farming, because you're cutting out kind of all the inefficiencies and you're streamlining that supply chain. So those are some solutions that we're looking to bring to the Northern Triangle. And yeah, it's just been a fantastic project. We're in the very, very early days of getting going. I'm really excited to see what we can do, through Mastercard and also with all the fantastic organizations that are part of the broader partnership.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. Your expertise is extremely needed. It's an extremely timely set of events that's occurring down there, but it sounds like you definitely have spent a lot of time thinking through a lot of the issues that need to be set up and taken care of. So it's very exciting. Stephanie, one of the things that really impressed me about you and reading through your bio originally is when you're not doing all of this, you don't rest. You're also involved in a variety of other fascinating nonprofits. One called Girls on the Run, also known as Girls on the Run International. Another, the Girls Network, focused on young girls and a variety of programs, increasing confidence and competence and emotional, physical, and behavioral and social support. Walk us through, if you would, how you got involved with these two organizations and a little bit about what they do.
Yeah, they're both just fantastic organizations. So the Girls Network, actually, I got connected to them through Mastercard because Mastercard used to be one of their corporate sponsors. And the Girls Network is this fantastic organization in the UK. What they do is they work with girls aged 14 to 19, and their mission is to empower these girls, and they're typically girls that we're working with who are from, poor communities, who go to schools that are under-resourced, and it's really filling a massive void for these girls who don't necessarily have a role model or someone who can just dedicate a lot of time to them. So what the Girls Network tangibly does is they have a one-to-one mentoring scheme. So they're actually connecting each of the girls they work with to a professional, kind of from a variety of different industries, different ages, different backgrounds and experiences, and providing them that resource for kind of this one-year journey, and they can continue staying in touch afterwards as well. So they have someone to talk to. So, I mean, imagine you're a 14-year-old girl at school. The school's really under-resourced. Like, how do you even begin to navigate your path forward? To think about, these are your aspirations or your dreams for after school, or even within school, and thinking about your development needs and your skills. So they get this person who they can talk to, and we work with some of the girls who are younger who, for example, one girl just crippled by shyness, couldn't go into a coffee shop and even order a drink because didn't think that she had the right to be in that space. I mean, it's heartbreaking. So worked with her mentor over the course of the year to build up self-esteem through different exercises, and just having someone who's there who, when she calls, her mentor picks up the phone and is always there to speak with her. We work with girls who are told by their school counselors, don't apply to the top universities. Like, you will never get in. Despite having fantastic grades, you will not get in. And the girls don't see people who look like them at these schools. So of course they think, well, it's not for me, right? So we work with the girls to help them understand, no, you do have the right to be there. You do have the right to get these fantastic educations as well. And so, we kind of think through, what is the girl's ambition? And typically the schools that Girls Network is partnering with are in, like I said, poor communities, and they go in and the girls have to apply. They have to actually want to be part of the scheme. So they tend to be very ambitious and very bright, and they just need someone who has time to talk to. I mean, they might not have someone at home, or that person might just be busy. If your parent's working multiple jobs, she doesn't necessarily always have the time to sit with you and go through your homework and kind of talk to you about everything. So that's the Girls Network. I've known my mentee, who is just fantastic, and she's at university now. I've known her for just over 3 years, I think. So we've kept the relationship much longer than the one-year program. And I'm now part of the advisory group for the organization as well, working with our founder, Charlie, who's also just a fantastic woman. So that's the Girls Network. Then Girls in the Run, which you mentioned as well, I had worked with them for about a year and a half or 2 years while I was in Washington. So I went to Washington, D.C. on a secondment with work. Their fundamental mission is very similar. It's about kind of empowering girls. They work with girls who are a little younger as well. Their approach is different. It's less about kind of one-to-one mentoring, and it's more taking it from a sports approach. So how do you build girls' confidences? How do you teach them a healthy lifestyle? By doing things like a regular running practice and kind of having different coaching sessions. And it's really sweet. They do these different lessons, and then they train for a 5K race at the end of the program, at the end of the year, which is a really lovely event every year. So I've done some fundraising with them. But it's fantastic. You see the girls like really build their confidence over the course of that year. And honestly, it just gives them somewhere to be as well. A lot of these girls don't have somewhere to go to after school. Like I said, if their parents are working multiple jobs, if they're in a foster home, they might not have somewhere safe to always be. And so this gives them an after school activity and kind of a group of adults you can supervise and friends to hang out with. But yeah, they're both fantastic organizations. There's so many like them out there in the world doing great things. I think it kind of comes back to what we talked about at the start, this kind of interest and inclusion. And I love working with kids. I've always, I tutored when I was in school. I always liked mentoring. So it just seemed like a really natural connection. And when I had that experience with the Girls Network and I moved to DC, the first thing I did when I knew I was moving was, what are the organizations out there? Like, how can I do something similar in a similar capacity? And that's how I found Girls on the Run.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Obviously very passionate about mentoring. Stephanie, talk a little bit about the mentors that came before you. Who mentored you? Who are major influencers that have kept you on this this path? Take time to mention, shout out to anyone that you want that's been really influential in your own career and your life.
That's a great question. So I find kind of my mentors pretty close to home. I have this, frankly, is an amazing group of women, my friends, my life. They're my inspiration, right? I look to them and kind of see their career choices. You know, we talk all the time. I get inside their head of what they're thinking about. And I really use my friends and also my family as a barometer for my own career choices, and then kind of how I navigate my own path. So, you know, as an example, I have a friend who's done a complete 180 on her marketing career to go and retrain as a therapist. And it's so amazing to see kind of the joy that it brings her and then the impact that she'll have with the patients that she works with. I have a friend who is a civil servant. She's dedicated her career in the UK to civil service. And she's bringing her intelligence and level-headedness to the government when, frankly, governments around the world sorely need help right now to navigate out of this pandemic. So that's just truly fantastic to see. And across the board, all my friends have this amazing kind of commitment to work. They have this fantastic work ethic. They have a commitment to finding impact in what they do, either through impact to their employees and the people they work with, or through the kind of end output of what it is that they're building and creating with their customers. And also they look for joy in the work they do, and they find a good work-lifestyle balance, which we all need to remember to do. But also I think my family, right? I mean, my mother's a teacher. My godfather and his wife work in the development sector. They've both worked in really fragile and quite dangerous contexts. So definitely have drawn a lot of kind of inspiration from their career journeys and tried to, you know, kind of mirror that in what I'm doing. And that certainly has kind of influenced me towards the humanitarian development work at Mastercard as well, albeit from the safety of my London office. But yeah, certainly I think I use friends and family as kind of as my guides for my career path, and they're my point of inspiration.
Wonderful, wonderful. It's really an exciting portfolio and set of initiatives you have there, Stephanie, and really it's amazing what you're doing. Really wishing you the best with all of this moving forward. For everybody that is going to be listening to this particular episode on our podcast or watching on the YouTube channel, you've been listening to the very energetic and multi-talented Stephanie Smith, Director of Humanitarian and Development at the Mastercard organization. Check out her work at the Partnership for Central America. Check out, of course, Girls on the Run in Washington, D.C., the Girls Network in London, all which she's also involved in. Stephanie, I want to take the time to really thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come on our show. Thank you for everything you're doing there. And as we say on our show, thank you for helping to create a better tomorrow through all of your initiatives. It's very, very inspirational in your story.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been great to talk.